Clyde and his wife and their young son were in Beirut, Lebanon, probably been sometime in the early 70s. And I don't know what year it was exactly, but there was a major war had broke out in Lebanon. Lebanon was being shelled, lots of people being killed. Clyde says, if we're going to live, I got to get out of here. And again, he was an airline captain, and he flew 707s, as I recall. And he got his wife and what personal belongings they could get, and they headed for the airport. That plane is normally, it takes 2 pilots to fly it, but he got in that plane and basically stole the airplane from the airport before the airport got hit. And he flew that plane to Amman, Jordan, and just asked for asylum. He said, "You can have the plane. I just want to get out of Beirut." I don't know if he really got citizenship, but he basically landed a job with King Hussein flying 747s after that. So he became a pilot, not a military pilot, but a commercial airline pilot. And he flew all over the world and flew 747s. And that was about the time I first met Clyde. A few years after we met, we had become good friends. He came to my home, and this is when I lived in Charlotte. He came to my home many times, and if he was laying over in the States, he would just get on the plane, come down to Charlotte and visit with us, and go down to Charleston, where his wife's family was from. We just became real good friends, and my first wife passed away in '79, and right after that, he had told King Hussein about my situation with my wife dying, and I had 2 kids, about 10 and 12. We got an invitation to come to Jordan with another ham out of Charlotte. So the 2 couples with our wives and 2 children, we went on an all-expense-paid trip to Jordan with a side week in Cyprus. I did not get to meet the king, but I actually saw him. He had a meeting in a hotel where we were staying, but we had 3 invitations to come to the palace for dinner and to play ham radio, and they all got canceled at the last minute because of some political situation. But I became very good friends with other members of his family who were hams. We got shuttled around the country of Jordan in palace Mercedes limousines for a week or so. We were living high on the hog. We just became friends over the air. Okay. And I don't think Clyde was a ham here in the States. He first had an OD5 license in Lebanon, then he got his JY call, and he also had a home over on the island of Cyprus, and he had a beautiful home there. One of the interesting things that we did when we were in Jordan, we got to visit all these historical locations that were in that country, and there's a lot of beautiful things. I also learned that there's no oil in Jordan. I said, what does this country export that brings them money? It's not oil. They don't have an oil field at all there. Phosphate, and that's where they get most of their money, believe it or not. But during the course of Clyde and our relationship, he told me one day that his son had gotten locked up in Mexico. That his son was a pilot, but not 747, just a little small airplane, single engine. And he lived in Texas, and he and a buddy were out flying one day, and they were illegally flying down into Mexico, and they had engine trouble, and they had to land, and they were captured by some federal Mexican police who were looking for drug dealers. Long story short on that, he got locked up for about six months or so, and Clyde would even fly over to the United States and go to Mexico and visit his son in prison. He had no problems in visiting his son. They were always cordial to Clyde. But, there was nothing going on about getting his son out. I had contacted every political person I could think of in the United States. Basically, I got no help from the American government to help get him out. I lost about 20 pounds over a few months just being involved with that thing. It was just eating on me, and I lost weight just trying to get this young man out of jail. Finally, one day, Clyde said, Gary, I have an old friend who was with Pan American Airways who used to live in Mexico City. He said, why don't you contact him and let's see if he could maybe, if he knows somebody that might be able to put some kind of pressure on the police or the government to get my son out of jail. So fortunately, I was able to contact that ex-Pan American Airlines big shot, told him the story, and he said, yep, I think we can help get Clyde's son out of jail. So this man went to visit the young man in prison, and on his way back, he called me and he said, I've arranged for a doctor to go visit him, and while he's there, he's going to give him, and I don't to this day know if it was a shot or if it was a pill, but he was given some medication to make the prisoner, Clyde's son, look as if he had infectious hepatitis. I don't even know that the son knew he was going to have that type of appearance, but he came down with what everybody thought was infectious hepatitis, and when that was known, they banished him back to the United States. They did not want him down there, especially being locked up in prison. They weren't able to deal with something. So he came back to the States and had to go through several weeks of detox in a hospital in Houston. But he got out. He got out. That was part of one of my presentations about a humanitarian story that I was involved in. And
beam on the cover of CQ?
Yes, it is. That was in the middle 90s. Up at the very top, there are two certificates from CQ magazine. There's kind of their equivalent to ARRL's DXCC for CW sideband. They have a DXCC phone and a DXCC sideband, and that's the two top ones. And then, let's see, the two in the middle are, I did make the cover of CQ magazine twice back in the 90s. I knew I was going to make it once because they contacted me and wanted to do a story and take a picture of my 80-meter beam and so forth. So we did that. And at the time, their photographer was here. He was making a lot of other pictures, and I did not know I was going to be on it again. It was just a surprise. They weren't consecutive months. I was fortunate enough to make the CQ's DX Hall of Fame, and I was presented with that plaque back several years ago at Dayton. The bottom right is probably my best achievement. That's the 5-band worked all zones certificate, #2 in the world, and #1 for North America, 1971. That was before the internet. Right now, we have all these various things for spotting DX, all because of the internet. Internet's a great way of letting people all over the world know that something is on or how to make a sked. The 5-band WAZ was out the use of the internet or any other social media, because there wasn't social media then. But that was all done with that Heathkit SB 102. When I started chasing that, I never in my life even considered that I would be able to make it just because of 80 meters. Propagation conditions were totally a different animal in the 70s. What we're going through now are very poor conditions. I found out, I knew the bands well, and my strategy when I started on the 5-band worked all zones would work a station. I started off on 10 meters. I knew if I could work a guy on 10 meters, anytime, mostly the day or night, if I could work him on 10, I could work him on 15 and 20 at the same time. We would go from 10, 15, and 20, and then I would schedule them at nighttime for 40 and 80. And bang, 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 bang. It just all fell into place. With my cheap antennas, I had little quarter wave slopers. I had 3 of them for 80 meters and 1 full wave, half wave dipole for 40. Those 4 antennas were 4 antennas, but they were also used as guy wires on my 56-foot tower. I had a very inexpensive, basic antenna system, but conditions were awesome. I just had a lot of people who were interested in helping me, and I'd work them on 10, 15, and 20, starting in the morning, and then schedule them for the low bands at night. And it sure worked out good. To get number 2 for the world and number 1 for North America made my heart kind of warm.
Yeah. Well, did you start out seeking that, or did it just kind of happen?
They announced that award about 6 months before it went into effect. And I got real interested. It started January 1st, 1979, I believe is when the 5-band WAZ went into effect. I knew about it about 6 months before it was implemented. So I'd kind of planned my strategy as how I was going to work it, not thinking I would ever get it so quick or at all because of my very simple antennas for 80 and 40. But I did it. And it was a great thing. No, it was a goal. I decided in the beginning, I said that would be a great addition to the hobby. I'd had my 5-band DXCC and 5-band WAS, but having 5-band worked all zones, that was my CQ. I said that'd be neat to have that. But it's hard to believe that was accomplished on a postage-size lot with simple antennas. Sure was good conditions then. I'd go back to my simple Charlotte location and antennas if we had the same kind of propagation today, but it doesn't exist. W0 Mike Lima Sierra was his stateside call, but in Papua New Guinea, he was Victor Kilowatt 9 Mike or P29 Mike. That country changed calls, but Mel and I had been friends for a number of years, and one day that 2 things happened. I'll tell you the funniest part of a story with Mel. Mel got interested in working in the United States. He got interested in working countries on 75 meters. But back in the early 70s, the VKs, Australia, New Zealand, New Guinea, they were all under the Australian rules and regulations for where they could transmit, and they could only transmit down around 3,600 was as high as they could come on sideband. And I had talked Mal into coming and working us on 75, and the only thing he had was an old Drake TR4. He didn't have the ability to split frequency. So Mal would come on 75 meters and he would transmit down close to 3,600, and he'd have to spin the dial and come up to 3,800 and listen to us. Then he'd have to spin the dial and go back down the band. And this went on for several days, and I could tell he was getting a little bit tired of that. And one day he told me, he said, Gary, said, just start listening for me on your frequency. I'm not going to stay down here. I'm going to transmit up there where you guys are. I said, Mal, now don't get yourself in trouble. But he kept transmitting where we were up in the American phone band. And again, I told him one day, I said, Mal, I don't want you to lose your license over there because you're out of the band. He says, just don't worry about it. He says, remember, I'm a priest, and after each transmission, I forgive myself. I thought that was a really funny thing. And the same thing happened a few years later. Mal told me one morning, says, Gary, I got a bunch of doctors over here from the University of Pittsburgh, but he says they've been sent over here to try to determine why all these children of the natives are dying. The death rate for a new baby over there was just tremendous. And these doctors over here doing research, and they're having to put all this information on a cassette tape or write things down and mail it. And, it'd take 2 to 3 weeks for that cassette tape and the written material to get back to the United States. They would analyze it, put the information back on a cassette tape and in a letter and mail it back. you're probably looking at a month to 5 weeks on the turnaround of information. Mal said, that would really be interested, and Mal knew I had a good phone patch, and I had free AT&T long distance service at that time, being an AT&T employee. I said, Mal, why don't you take those doctors tomorrow and go down to the ship, and we'll run a phone patch. We can, if they're on the ship, you can use your stateside call W0MLS Maritime Mobile. He wasn't even near a ship. He was way in the highlands in the mountains of New Guinea. He was hundreds of miles from a ship, but he knew exactly what I was talking about. So he got the doctors there at his little home, and they gave me the telephone numbers of the doctors up in Pennsylvania, and I called and got them on the phone, had a little conversation with those doctors before we went on the air. We started exchanging information from the United States to the doctors in New Guinea. Every other day, we ran phone patches on 20 meters for weeks. Because of that ability for those doctors to contact the home base in Pennsylvania, they were able to cut the death rate down from a tremendous number of children dying to almost nobody dying because of whatever disease they had. W0LS Maritime Mobile they were on this big cruise ship up in the jungles. Somehow or another, that big ship just made its way up there to the high mountains where those antennas were.
Sweet, but he forgave himself at the end.
And yes, he told me after each transmission he'd forgive himself because he was a priest.
Well, he did a great thing, though. So.
And that's nothing that's ever been published.
Till now.
It was never published, but old Mal and I were very pleased that the results of those illegal phone patches was able to save a lot of lives. And I've always been proud of the illegal work that I did with the priest, and he forgave me too. Well, it's been nice talking to you about some of these overseas humanitarian interest things that I've been involved in over the past 64 years, running phone patches from the major earthquake down in Nicaragua to running phone patches from Antarctica.
For God.
Oh, those are all legal.
Yeah, but you were running. But some of these you ran for God.
Yes. Yeah. God wanted me to do that.
Yes, he did. And he forgave you.
And Father Mal was living during the big earthquake down in Nicaragua, and he forgave me for those phone patches I ran.
And those were the ones you ran for God, right?
I did.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It helped all these families in the United States learn that their relatives were still living and weren't squashed or crushed, whatever the right name is.
Both.
But the hobby of ham radio has just been my life and my family, and we've made so many great, met so many great people. I've been to Hong Kong and was able to operate there. Talked to a lot of my buddies back here in the States. And I just think it's, a lot of people have their hobbies. A lot of people have golf. That's theirs. This is my golf. But my hobby is mostly done from home. Been on a few minor expeditions to French St. Martin, Bermuda, Bahamas, mostly with other couples here in the Fort Mill, Charlotte area. Margarita. Oh, it just came to me. I might have to have another one.
You should.
But I love margaritas. That's probably all I drink. Mostly a little beer. I don't drink anything much anymore since I discovered I had diabetes, and I slacked off on things with sugar. I never was hooked on it. I just like to do it. It was a recreation. Thanks for the visit today.